virtual machine, and now we see the containers, because it's very important before we start working on the MikroTik and we work with the containers that we understand what is the container, because a lot of people just say, yeah, container, Docker, what is that exactly? So with this lecture, you have a clear idea or a clearer idea about the containers. So why we use, or people are using more containers. So you see there are a lot of advantages using the containers. So this is all what I wanted to show you in this lecture. I hope it was informative for you, and I'll see you in the upcoming lecture. Hi there, this is Mar Haddad here. So in this first lecture, I have to explain to you what is the difference between the virtual machine and the container. So the evolution now is that you see a lot of people are using containers, but they don't really understand what is the container. So what I wanted to do in this video is just to show you the difference, how first we started using the computer, the normal computer, the physical computer, and putting there the application, and then how we went to the virtual machines and how nowadays we are using the containers. And I'm going to show you what is the difference and what is the advantage and the disadvantage of each of the ones. So this is what we are going to do in this lecture. Let's start directly with the explanation. So back in the years, we have started using a single server, which is physical server, running a single operating system. So you can see this is the server here, and this is the operating system. And then after that, we use the application. So every time we wanted to put an application, we really needed to have an operating system. First, we need to have the hardware, which is the CPU, the motherboard, the RAM, the storage, and so forth. And then we have to have the operating system, and then we have the application. But in this case, if we are running, for example, just one application, we are wasting a lot of hardware resources like CPUs, resources that we are wasting a lot of storage, a lot of memories just to run one application. So then in this case, what happens? We have the new evolution, which is the virtual machine. So what happened in this case? That the virtual machines has appeared, and for the virtual machine to work, it needs a hypervisor. So let's first go with this points one by one to explain to you, so then we go in sequence. So the servers were underutilized. That means we have a server, which is physical server, has a lot of RAM, a lot of CPU, and we are running one application or two. So we have a lot of wasting of resources that is unused. Now, what we can do then in this case, we could run multiple operating system and multiple application on the same physical server using the virtual machines. So in this case, the virtual machines came, and we made on the same physical server, we could run multiple operating systems and multiple applications on the same physical server. So that means the resources which were for the CPU and the memory and so forth are used for multiple virtual machines and multiple operating systems actually, and then we can run more applications. So what is the virtual machine? You have to consider that the virtual machine is identical as a physical server, except it is virtual. So yeah, it's not the real physical hardware, but it is virtual, but it has all the features that the physical hardware they have. So it has virtual hardware such as CPU, memory, storage, network card, and so on. And all those run on the hypervisor. So very important to know that we have something called the hypervisor. I'm gonna explain it to you in a moment. But the hypervisor is the one which allow us that on the same physical machine to run multiple virtual machines and to run, for example, multiple operating systems. And on top of those operating systems, we can run multiple applications. So the hypervisor is the server virtualization software that run on the physical server, and it is where you can create virtual machines and configure how much CPU core you want, memory, storage, and so on for each virtual machine. So again, you have the physical hardware, and then on top of the physical hardware, you can have the hypervisor, and then on top of the hypervisor, you can run the virtual machines, and on each of the virtual machine, you can say, yeah, what is the CPU you want for it, but all those are virtual, CPU, memory, the storage, and so forth. So everything will be virtual, but for you, it will be looking like it's real a physical hardware. And in this way, we don't waste all the resources that are running on the physical hardware just to have one operating system and few applications, so we don't waste that. But now let's see what are the hypervisors and how many types do we have. So as you see here, we have two types of hypervisors. We have type 1 and we have type 2. So type 1, and that is what you see here, the hypervisor runs directly on the hardware. Some example of this type of hypervisors, the VMware ESXi, the Citrix 10, KVM, and Microsoft Hyper-V. So you can see we have the hardware, where we have the physical CPU, memory, RAM, and so forth. Then we run directly the hypervisor on the hardware itself. So in this case, this hypervisor, you have to consider this is an operating system, but it just has one option or one goal is to allow us to run virtual machines. So we run just one virtual machine, we run an operating system on that virtual machine, and we run the applications on that operating system. We have another customer, then we also make virtual machine, operating system, applications. Third customers, virtual machine, operating system, and application. So that is the type 1. So you can see on the same physical hardware, I'm now able to run different operating system and different applications, and they are all isolated from each other. So they are fully isolated. When we use virtual machine, they are fully isolated from each other. So that's how sometimes when you want to have a website for your company, then you go to a company which can provide you storage and provide you the web interface. So then what they do, they create for you on the virtual machine, they create for you some storage. It's on the same physical server, but then you are a different customer. So then in this case, you have this, we call it the instance for you alone. Now, there is also type 2, which is the hypervisor runs on top of the operating system like Windows, Mac OS, Linux, for example, like Oracle VirtualBox, VM VirtualBox, or VMware Workstation. So the type 2 has the same function as the type 1, but instead of having the hypervisor installed directly on the hardware, so you have first an operating system here installed, and then the hypervisor comes on top of this operating system, and then you can create the virtual machines and then the operating system and applications. So you can see this is the same as the one, but you have already the operating system. And that's something, if you come from the MikroTik environment, you know that I've used a lot of my labs with the GNS3 or using the VirtualBox. So then what I did is just created the MikroTik routers using VirtualBox. That means I'm using the type 2. So I have my hardware, I have my Windows installed. There is the hypervisor, which is the VirtualBox in this case, and I'm able to create some instances for the MikroTik. So those are two different types that we have from the hypervisors. So now we understand the two different types. Let's see what are the advantages and disadvantages. So let's talk first about the advantage of the virtual machine. So the advantage of the virtual machine, it is easy to understand as it is just like the physical server but virtual. So what you normally do on the physical server, you can do it on that one. Same thing. So it's easy for you to do the configuration on it. So it's the same way that you use on the physical server as for the management and security tools, you will be using it on the virtual server. So this is one of the advantage, is that there is nothing new. There is no surprises here. The same thing that you normally do on the physical hardware, you can do on the virtual machine. The drawback or the disadvantage of the virtual machine is that it contains a lot of overhead. So let me explain why there is a lot of overhead. So the example is, if you want to run an application which has a size, including its dependencies, of like 5 megabytes. So this application is just very small application, 5 megabytes. That's what I want to run to use. So any application, whatever the application is, say FreeRadius or any other application, it's just small. It is having 5 megabytes as capacity or as size. So if you are using the virtual machine, then what you need to do, you have first to install the operating system, because we said we should have the operating system. For example, we have to put here on operating system, say Ubuntu. So the Ubuntu needs at least 3.4 gigabytes, which is 3,400 megabytes. So that's the size. And then you have to install the application on top of it, right? So then this makes in total the operating system 3,400 and 5 megabyte For the application, that's 3405. So in this case, this is what the overhead is. So you see, we have to install the operating system to be able to install the application. Of course, you may say, I may install some more applications. That's true. But in some cases, you maybe need to run only one application. So you need the operating system to run the application. You see how much you are wasting capacity from your hard drive. Now, on top of that, you have to think is every time you want to go to the application, you have to run the operating system. So it has to go to the BIOS. It has to load the whatever the operating system you're running here. So we said Ubuntu or Windows. So it has to load it. And then after that, you have to open the application to work. So also there is a drawback. It takes time for the application to run. So this is one of the disadvantages of the virtual machine. Now, there is also a disadvantage of the hypervisor. It is that when the hypervisor crashed, all the virtual machine will crash and disappear. So say that this hypervisor is down, just is killed, then all the virtual machines that you have here, they stop working. So that's also a drawback you have to keep in mind. Now, what is the evolution that comes now and that is mostly used now, and this course is based on it? So it is the containers. So containers, sometimes they are also referred as lightweight virtual machine, but they are not really like virtual machine. It's a package that contains the application and its dependencies and nothing more. So we will see in the upcoming lecture when we want to install the container on the MikroTik and install different packages. So we will see that you only need to get the package, which is, for example, on the virtual machine, it's called the application. So it's really like an application just to make it run. All right. You don't need to install operating system and all those things that we have to do on the virtual machine. It's just you need to get the package. So this package is stored as a container image. So normally what we normally use is we say I'm getting a container about FreeRadius or about Apache or about Adguard or whatever. So those means that those are the packages. So that is what we call it, the containers. All right. So those packages that are called container images. Now, the container runs on top of the container engines such as Docker, which is in turn run on top of the operating system. So let me just show you this picture. So we have here the physical hardware. We have the operating system on this physical hardware. We get the container engine. So normally the container engine, there are different ones, but the most known one, famous one, is called Docker. All right. So Docker is a container engine. I'm going to show to you also some more container engine. So now what you need to do, you just get the package or the container image, and then you run it on top of the container engine. So say this is one container, and there is another one container, and there is another container. So all of those, they are running on top of the container engine, which is the Docker. And they are all separated to each other. The container engine will separate them on their process. So they are not fully isolated as we have on the virtual machine. So they are only isolated on the process. And that means that you have to be careful when you get the container to see if there are some vulnerabilities on these containers, and always get the latest version because then in this case you have less possibility to be hacked on those containers. All right. So some other container engines, we said we have Docker, this is the main one. There is also Rocket, LXD, Linux V server, and Windows containers. All right, so that's important to know, but we are going to use Docker in this course. And then the containers are very fast and are isolated from each other by the container engine. So as I said, the container engine will isolate them on the process. So that means they are just running very fast. So the good thing about the container is that you do not need to put an operating system every time that you need to install a container, because it will run on top of this operating system, which is the host operating system. So all you need to do, you just take the package or the container image, and then you just install it, and it runs directly. It's very fast, and you don't have to wait at all, and you don't have to install some operating system on top of it to waste more capacity from your hard disk. No, you just have, if you have a container image of 5 megabytes, that's it, 5 megabytes. You don't need to add another thing. So now we understand what is the container.